I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is projections, talking about how when people project their observations of us on us, how we might lose our sense of self and balance, and how we can find a middle way in being able to receive feedback while at the same time maintaining our sense of centeredness and presence. So before we get started, let's take a deep breath. Let's just take a couple minutes to get centered. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing every cell, every organ, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your electrons, all your molecules, and lighting you up from the inside out. And as you exhale any remaining stress, tension, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Very softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms. Feel the deliciousness of that sensation and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now, in your wonderful body in this moment in time. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's another new week. And so we're talk about projections and where reality resides, I guess, is when we get feedback, a reaction from another person, we have a response to that or a reaction to that. And when we look at the feedback that we're getting, and I'm using that word feedback for what might otherwise be considered criticism. We're going to just talk about criticism or attack, and how that is a reflection of the person who is giving that criticism or attack, right? Because each of us has our own perception of the world. And so we can turn this around and look at when we criticize or attack, that's also a reflection of us. So if I feel unheard, then that it may be that the other person is not listening, and it may be that I'm not communicating effectively. It could be a spectrum of realities that are actually occurring. However, we're so immersed in our experience that our reality is that we're not being heard, or we're not being seen, or we're not being considered. When in reality, perhaps, or from the other person's vantage point, perhaps we're not articulating ourselves. Perhaps we're not communicating clearly. Perhaps we're expecting the other person to read our minds in some way or another. And so when we're getting the feedback that shows up as an attack, if we can recognize it as feedback perhaps on our behavior, so that we have an opportunity to look at our own behavior, Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about um, projection and how we project on other people situations or our own experience, essentially, that our interactions with others are projections of our own state of mind, our own stuff in many cases. So good morning, Amanda. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. So when we feel hurt, for instance, let's say somebody says or does something that we get offended or we feel hurt, what's happening? What's happening is that we're typically projecting, we're writing a story about what happened. And we're making ourselves the object of that. You know, maybe we feel hurt if we're blaming, let's just talk about that. If we're blaming somebody else for our feelings, for hurting me, you know. Good morning, Josie. Welcome. So let's say somebody says something and I get hurt. I feel hurt about it. And why am I feeling hurt about it? Because I'm creating an interpretation or a story about their response that I then feel hurt about. Good afternoon, Pat. So good to have you here. Welcome. Happy Monday, all. So we're talking about projections and how the projections that we project on others or that they project on us can impact the way that we respond and the way that they respond. Good morning, Kimberly. Welcome. It's great to have you here. So we're talking about how the projections that we make from our own experience impact others and vice versa. So if I am projecting upon someone that they are inconsiderate, that's my story about who they are, then it's likely that I'm going to have an experience of them not being considerate to me, right? And when I project on another, it's going to most likely influence their behavior. So if I'm expecting someone to be inconsiderate, then it may end up actually breeding that kind of behavior in them. So I remember years ago, I was working at a retail clothing store. And in that retail clothing store position, I had the responsibility to lock up at the end of the day. And it was so interesting. This is maybe a case for hypnosis. We can talk about that in a second. Good morning, Jenny. Wonderful to have you here. We're talking about projections. So this was years and years ago, but the manager, I guess I was assistant manager so long ago, I don't even really remember. Anyway, she said, don't forget to lock up. Don't forget to lock up. Don't forget to lock up. Don't forget. And, you know, when you tell somebody don't do something, what you're doing is you are programming the thing you're telling them not to do. Why? Because in order to not do something, our brain has to engage with the thing that we're not supposed to do. Right. So she was very concerned about me not locking up. And typically I had been very responsible. And I don't know, I, the only thing I could attribute it to is hypnosis. Because it was so out of character, and I forgot to lock up. Now, how does somebody forget to lock up the store? I mean, it's just bizarre, right? But the projection of the expectation, and maybe the languaging, whatever, it served to have exactly the opposite intended result, but exactly the feared result. And so when we project, like, she had an expectation, I guess, that I would not be responsible, and I complied. Like, not willingly, not deliberately, not even totally unconsciously, being totally unconscious. But how bizarre, right? And so when, like, looking at that experience in my own life, um, has had an impact on, has made me really aware of the impact that we can have on each other, and the impact of these projections. So we project all kinds of ways on others, and even on ourselves. When we have expectations of ourselves that we're going to not perform well, or part of me, I think, at that time when I neglected to lock up the store, I think part of me was really afraid that I was going to mess up, and it all fed up into my fears. And somehow all of that self-programming and programming from the projected expectation, just whatever it was really effective. So I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where somebody's saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and you end up doing it. And it's like, what in the world? How did that happen? How did I allow that? When my intention was to, fulfill a positive expectation. And so when people have negative expectations of ourselves or of others, we tend to either fulfill them or manifest the other person fulfilling that expectation. And it's kind of a backwards manifesting protocol or talent, right? To be able to create these undesired circumstances. And so when we, it also works in a positive way, right? Like when we project positive intention, that also can shift behavior radically. So good morning, Dennis. So good to have you here. And Jenny, I think I said hello to you, but just in case, welcome. So we're talking about, like, I think one of the things about the art of manifestation is where we put our attention is where our energy goes, right? And when we have emotional energy behind that intention, then we're supercharging it. You're welcome, Jenny. We're supercharging that intention, whether it's for good or for ill. So a lot of times we tend to feel negative emotions more powerfully than positive emotions, which is unfortunate. But it seems to be, that we are enculturated into fear, into reactivity, and thinking of the worst possible scenario. And when we think about these worst possible scenarios, we attach all kinds of negative emotions to it, and then that can empower those things to come into being. Whereas when we can focus our positive intention and positive emotion, then that powers the positive outcome. And so, again, projecting, if I project on people that they're kind and welcoming, like if I'll smile to somebody or interact with somebody out of the projection of them being kind and welcoming, then I'm likely to get a positive response back, right? Maybe a kind and welcoming response back. So it's interesting to try to sort through what is an intuition and what is a projection. And because sometimes we get really strong gut feelings about something, right? Or about someone, like an alarm signal sometimes about someone. Now, it may be that someone has an appearance very much like someone who we felt wronged by in our life. And so we're making that other than conscious association with that person and projecting this other person's behavior on them. At other times, it may be that we are actually picking up on something that is a legitimate alarm. Trying to make the distinction between those things is not always the easiest thing. Good morning, Kimberly. So Kimberly says, welcome, by the way. Kimberly says, I believe this is so true. When I have had pressure not to drink and was told, don't drink, I end up drinking, and the results are worse. When I get positive encouragement and trust in myself, I don't have the desire to drink. I'm thankful for this understanding. No more self-sabotage. Good for you, Kimberly. That's awesome. It's true. Like I noticed with myself something similar. It's like when in the past I've tried to discipline myself with a diet, for instance. When I was when I wasn't aligned with it, but I was trying to discipline myself into doing it. Pretty much anything, actually, then there would be this part of me, this rebellious part of me that just said no and went the other way. So the insistence of don't kind of can lead us more strongly into doing the thing that we don't want to do. It's kind of crazy how that all works, right? So our projections are a container or a context within which we interpret things. So let's say, again, I believe that someone is inconsiderate, then I'm going to see their behavior through that lens, regardless. And if there's a way to interpret their behavior through the lens of being inconsiderate as being inconsiderate, whatever the behavior is, I'm going to interpret it that way, right? When we think of the phrase, don't take it personally, on one hand, everything is personal because that's how we interpret everything. Everything is filtered through our own personality, our own experience. So everything is personal in that respect. On the other hand, people's behavior is a reflection or a projection of who they are as well. So besides what they might be projecting on you, it's a projection of their own context, right? Everybody's behavior, all of our behaviors are projections of our own context. So if I get offended by something that someone says or does, then in the fact that I'm getting offended is me projecting my experience, right? And yet, if somebody says or does something that is offensive, and I can recognize that that behavior is a projection of them, that it doesn't really have to do with me. It's their response to something that might have occurred between us. Maybe I was being inconsiderate, or maybe they hadn't communicated effectively their wants or needs. So it's such an interesting place to play here, to look at the interface between, like, it comes back to the question, what's real? And I think the fact of the matter is that pretty much everything is subjective, that it's all within our interpretation. And when we can recognize another person's behavior as a reflection of their context, then it may create openings to be able to communicate more effectively, to have more compassion, for instance. So, for example, if an animal is wounded, they may bark, right? They may bite, but you're not going to be wanting to kick a wounded animal, right? Even if it's barking and biting because it's wounded. We can have the understanding that that animal is wounded. And it's often a hard step to make from the place of being wounded by that bite, to finding compassion for that dog that has been wounded. And I think we're capable of it. And yet all those emotions may be there all at the same time in a royal of confusion, because you don't want to put yourself in proximity of a biting wounded dog, right? And you don't want to be kicking a biting wounded dog. So where, how ideally you want to help that dog, right? Ideally you want to be able to assist it, to feel better, to heal. And it can be pretty dangerous to be playing in that realm, right? As much compassion as you may have. So Rosalind says, water can be held in a container. If our being is like water and projections and experiences are the container, maybe projections work like constructs because our focus is directing where we put walls up. Maybe projections work like constructs because our focus is directing where we put walls up. I agree. I love the water analogy. I love the water analogy. So if our being is like water and projections and experiences are the container, maybe projections work like constructs because our focus is directing where we put walls up. So I think if I'm getting to the heart of what you're talking about as far as the container, Rosalind, is that it's mutable, that by shifting our focus, we get to redefine that container and those projections, the expression, and we get to morph and transform the container for our being. And when we have negative expectations, it does impact, it cannot not impact our experience. And when we can allow for a person's behavior to be a reflection of their own experience, it gives us the capacity to step outside of our limited self reactivity to gain a greater compassion for that woundedness in another, and sometimes even in ourselves. Sometimes we could look at ourselves and say, wow, why did I bite like that? And rather than beating ourselves up and making ourselves wrong, maybe we can find a place of compassion for ourselves that enables us to recognize the wound and gives us access to heal it, rather than beating ourselves up more, like kicking the wounded dog, if that makes sense. Because the idea is not to perpetuate the woundedness. The idea ultimately is to heal that woundedness, is to find a way to heal through. I think that self-compassion is a powerful tool in that respect. Just as we can find compassion for another when we think about, well, what must they be feeling to be reacting that way? Even though we might have a reaction in the moment, we can perhaps redirect our need to bite back. Maybe we can find some forgiveness for ourselves and for others by looking at the woundedness underneath. It doesn't mean that we want to put ourselves in proximity of that biting dog, though. I get that. And Kimberly, I agree with you that the water was a great analogy from Rosalind. Beautiful flow like the water. Exactly. So when we think about, maybe our whole experience of life is a projection, right? We have a projection of ourselves and of others. And I think that looking at the wound in ourselves and another can maybe help us to reshape that container that Rosalind was talking about. That as we recognize reactivity as an expression of pain, then maybe we can stop the cycle of injury. If we can recognize another's pain, because that other may have caused pain for us too, or precipitated pain for us too. So when we look at the dynamics of it, to get underneath the surface, maybe we have the opportunity to gain greater clarity around all these projections. Good morning, Isabel. So glad you could make it. We've been talking about projection and how projections shape our experience, whether from ourselves or from others, and that our projections also have the power in some cases to manifest the very thing that we're projecting. So I think that's it for this morning. And I am ever so grateful to be here with you and to be engaging in these conversations. So appreciative. And it's a great way to kick off the week. So I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Please, please check out the other awesome programming on the other Enlightened World Network properties, the EWN One with the Earth and Enlightened World Living. And Rosalind says, instead of trying to move water uphill, let it flow by gravity with ease. Moving obstacles when needed, we can use our intuition. Our intuition when taking the path of least resistance is best, or if we need to construct a wall to go in a different direction. Beautiful, beautiful, Rosalind. Thank you for that. And Tammy, welcome, welcome. So glad to have had you here. And it's just been such a pleasure as always. And Maggie was thrilled to be here too. So until next time, lots and lots of love. And let's project love. Take care.